My grandmother accused my mom of using voodoo against my cousin after my engagement, claiming our water held magical powers. Hello. Before I begin, I would like to mention that English is not my primary language, so I apologize for any errors I may make. I also apologize for the extensive text. My intention was to provide you with as much context as possible. I, a 25-year-old female, became engaged a few months ago, and my wedding is scheduled for 2 months from now. As an only child, I lost my father when I was around 6 years old. My mother chose not to remarry and dedicated herself to raising me. To provide some background, throughout my 25 years in this family, I have come to understand that my grandmother is a highly narcissistic individual who has issues with almost everyone she encounters. If you are within 50 meters of her, she maintains expectations that are nearly impossible for anyone to satisfy. She insists that everyone meets these unrealistic standards. When invited to a gathering or when she hosts one, you can be sure you are never dressed sufficiently for her liking. If your outfit is appealing, she will criticize the color. If the color is acceptable, she will comment on your body not being suitable for the dress. Your makeup will be deemed excessive or poorly executed, and your hairstyle is never right. If it's not your appearance, you can be certain that you have said something inappropriate during the event. You might stand incorrectly, breathe inappropriately, chat too much, say too little, humiliate me, laugh too loudly, refrain from assisting with preparations, or fail to wash the dishes when everyone else is working. If you try to help uninvited, she will question your motives, implying you are merely seeking attention. And if you choose not to dance, you will be made to feel worthless. Conversely, if you do dance, you will be compared unfavorably to a family member who has taken dance classes all summer. The judgments extend to body image, where I am criticized for being too overweight while my cousin is deemed too thin. I study the arts at university, so I am dismissed as worthless, while my cousin, who is merely a doctor by title, receives praise. My oldest aunt seems incapable of doing anything right, even basic tasks, and the youngest aunt struggles to maintain order in her household. My mother has become the family's scapegoat. Overall, my grandmother views you as an embarrassment and needs few reasons true or fabricated to hold disdain for you based on who you are. She had frequent arguments with my grandfather until his death 2 years ago, during which he was her primary target for resentment. He was not innocent himself. Raised in a culture that values men above women, he was abusive and had resorted to physical violence against my grandmother and their children, even threatening my youngest aunt. That topic is another story, but it gives you some insight into the depth of my grandmother's hatred for her husband, a feeling that she somehow extended to her children, whom she also chose to have with him despite her disdain. She felt it was imperative to marry at the age of 17 to avoid social stigma. She constantly blamed her children for not leaving her husband, insisting that she stayed with him solely for their sake because they were all inadequate. After my grandfather's death, my grandmother redirected her bitterness towards my oldest aunt, who she deems incompetent for being single at 60, and my mother. My oldest aunt was conditioned to believe she is incapable of managing her own life without my grandmother. Thus, she remains dependent and has lived with her for her entire life, making her the most convenient target. She is close to my grandmother and has been manipulated to the extent that she accepts everything my grandmother says without question, even expressing a willingness to sacrifice herself for her. My mother suffers in comparison. She simply is not the favored child. My grandmother favors my oldest and youngest aunts, which leaves me, my mother's child, as the least favored grandchild, especially when compared to my other cousin, my uncle's daughter. My grandmother also held a disdain for my father, adding another layer of animosity towards me and my mother, as I have inherited traits from him. While my youngest aunt also faces criticism from my grandmother, her flaws are more readily forgiven. Her children, particularly my cousin, 26 years old, are often seen as the golden children in this family dynamic. Despite my grandmother's unkindness, she expresses a clear favoritism towards my youngest aunt and her children. My oldest aunt especially dotes on her youngest sister and her children, practically glowing when discussing them. She constantly inquires if they will be visiting, showers them with treats, and used to buy gifts like dolls and toys, which she would conceal from me, fearing I would take them. I was prohibited from touching anything that belonged to my cousin, while she felt entitled to take whatever she wanted from me without seeking my permission. She would borrow my nice clothes, new items, and if I voiced any objection, I was labeled as selfish. People viewed my weight as a reason for me to eat less. I have a habit of organizing my food, even soup, from the least to most favorable items and eat them sequentially. After finishing her meal, she would take the portions I enjoyed from my plate, such as fries or toddig. If I complained, I would be told to let her have them since she was thin and was said to dislike the other food. My mother raised me to consume whatever was available without requesting different options, even if I disliked what was prepared. My grandmother dictated what everyone should consume, and if the meal did not meet her expectations, she would demand something else to be prepared. My oldest aunt would meticulously observe what and how much my mother and I ate, seemingly counting each bite with disdainful glances. We watched various Barbie movies on CDs that were purchased for my cousin, and I was prohibited from watching or even touching them when she was not around. I recall a time when I disabled the password on my new phone, having done so primarily due to my cousin sneaking in to read my messages, and subsequently went to sleep as I was tired and needed to wake early. I charged my phone completely, intending to use it the following day. When I awoke to my alarm, I discovered my battery at 50%. I asked what had happened and was told my cousin had played games on my phone while I slept. I could only remain silent, knowing I dared not protest. Every time I spoke up, I was deemed selfish. My cousin's father was neglectful, and her need to try everything was prioritized above my feelings. She could never be wrong or to blame. She was and still is praised as their perfect angel, thin, delicate, innocent, beautiful, and charming. I remember how they handled my oldest aunt's phone, treating it with care. Yet, when my mother bought phones for both of us, my oldest aunt maliciously stepped on mine, applying pressure with her full weight and grinding it under her foot for an extended period. She later claimed she hadn't noticed. Fortunately, my phone was durable, though its keyboard suffered as a result. On another occasion, my oldest aunt was almost screaming for my cousin to come and eat her lunch while I sat in the yard, waiting to see if anyone would call for me as well. Yet, not a single person acknowledged my absence, and I ended up skipping lunch that day. This was more than unfortunate. It underlined my feeling of invisibility within the family. I recall when we were much younger, and an attempt was made to make us take an afternoon nap. While we hid under the covers, laughing and talking, my cousin suddenly began to cry, resulting in my being banished from the room. It was winter, and that particular room was the only warm one. They forced me into the frigid room, accusing me of making my cousin cry by widening my eyes at her playfully. I was perplexed. I have large eyes that may have seemed rounder in play, but I could not fathom why they would believe a small child would intentionally aim to scare my cousin. Regardless, I was sent to remain alone in the cold room, donned in my jacket and shedding tears, utterly confused by their reaction. They tried to soothe my cousin's crying, and I could soon hear laughter, the sound of children's programming on television, and the aroma of food. No one bothered to check on me. After my tears ceased, I attempted to resume my homework alone, vaguely aware of the resentful glances directed at me as they passed by. When I finished my assignments, I bravely composed an apology note for my cousin, gathering my courage to approach the room. Upon opening the door, I felt all eyes on me, conversations halted, and everyone stared as if to chastise me for daring to enter. The environment was suffused with a palpable disdain. I expressed my regret to her and her mother for scaring her, and finally, I was permitted inside. Honestly, I cannot recall my mother's actions during this event. I experienced dissociation frequently, and many details remain unclear. I recollect a huge fight erupting when my mother asked my cousin to help me learn some English. The argument escalated to such a point that it led to estrangement for several years. During that time, I also dissociated, remembering fragments here and there. I vividly recall praying at night, asking for God to end my life, feeling responsible for the fierce conflict that resulted in family division. My mother and I felt abandoned while they maintained relationships with my youngest aunt and my cousin. My mother wept for an extended period, feeling devastated. To summarize, I never experienced love in that household. I consistently sought approval, particularly from my grandmother. I shielded her from my grandfather's aggression a few times, having to physically separate them. Over time, I learned to become invisible, disassociating from their constant negative behavior towards me and my mother, which eventually quashed any affection or respect I had once held. Their conduct seemed to encourage my cousin's sense of entitlement. I often joke that she inherited my grandmother's narcissism while I ended up with her perfectionism. Now, she feels entitled to all good things, believing she deserves everything, and expects my belongings simply because she is thinner, more attractive, more vulnerable, and possesses a medical degree, which evidently makes her superior to me. For additional context regarding my cousin's behavior, on the day of my engagement, she forcibly snatched my engagement ring off my finger during the celebration. Considering my weight, this act was hardly a simple task. My finger turned slightly red, but no harm was done. After inspecting it on herself to ensure it met her approval, she returned it. She also wore the shoes that I was donning that day. This was not the first occasion. She often claims anything I am given or purchased. Thankfully, with my wedding approaching, I will wear the same shoes again, but fortunately, unlike the last pair she tried to fit into, these have enough room for her larger feet, as her size is approximately 41 to 42, while I wear 36 to 39. I still own the previous pair she stretched to the point of becoming uncomfortable to wear afterward. Since they were brand new, I felt I had to use them despite the pain they caused after her forcing her foot inside. Regrettably, my mother, like her siblings, has been conditioned to not cut ties with our family, unlike my uncle, who has successfully distanced himself. Thus, we continued to visit them until the onset of COVID. My grandmother consistently applied pressure on myself, my cousin, and our mothers, belittling us and labeling us as unworthy or undeserving. We were accused of being rotten for not having married by what she deemed the embarrassing ages of 25 and 26. In our culture, having a boyfriend before marriage is frowned upon. While attitudes have shifted in recent years, allowing people to do as they please, given our traumatic experiences with abusive men, my grandfather, my cousin's father, and my own father in his lifetime, neither of us felt particularly eager to commit ourselves to potentially abusive relationships. Personally, I was not seeking anyone, often joking that I might become a sugar mommy once I have achieved financial stability. I had somewhat resigned myself to the idea of possibly dying alone, as I never considered myself particularly lovable. However, I eventually met my husband. We communicated for a few years, shared experiences, and ultimately decided to formalize our commitment through marriage. We had an acceptable relationship with my grandmother and aunts at that time and invited them to our engagement celebration as family elders. Predictably, things began to decline following that event. My grandmother managed to damage the sink while we were away. I was having my makeup applied. With guests arriving soon, the sink was vital for our preparations. My mom grew upset since she had previously told my grandmother to refrain from washing dishes, but as she has always disregarded instructions through her 82 years, she had caused the pipe to burst, flooding my mother's cookware and muddying the kitchen. My mother expressed her frustration, and my grandmother took offense, fleeing the scene while my mother began to clean. Ultimately, my mother had to abandon her efforts and go retrieve her, offering apologies midway through her departure. Yet the conflict was far from resolved. Then they claimed we had expelled them. I was present during that part and distinctly recall their hasty exit after the party concluded and all other guests had departed. We didn't explicitly ask them to stay, nor did we imply that they should leave. They departed solely on their own accord, but my grandmother now asserts we relegated them to the exit. She even accused my mother of stealing her spoons. I suspect old age might be clouding her judgment. She called my mother to verbally lash out at her, demanding the return of her, non-existent, spoons and alleging my mother had discarded them after the gathering. She has also accused both my mother and me, apologies for the coarse language, but these are her exact words of being too desperate for intimacy. Hence, my mother is supposedly eager to marry me off, while I am accused of being overly thirsty for intimacy. This is the same woman who berated my mom and me for our inability to secure husbands until now, and suddenly we are the ones pursuing intimacy. Apparently, while I was away visiting my mother-in-law for a few days, she unleashed a torrent of crude insults over the phone at my mother. My mother now refuses to answer any calls from their number, stating that it is unbearable. Reportedly, she labeled my mother with the most derogatory names imaginable. Additionally, my grandmother has alleged that my mother is employing magic or voodoo to curse my cousin, preventing her from finding a husband and allowing me to marry before her. What is her reasoning? To provide context, my mother and I usually carry bottled water with us, as we tend to become thirsty quickly during our lengthy bus rides. My mother recalls an incident when we returned from a gathering at my youngest aunt's house. We took an Uber, carrying some heavy items. She emptied her water bottle into the small garden area in their yard, aiming to lighten her handbag so it would be more manageable to carry the other bags. Since we were taking an Uber, she felt she could go without the water. My grandmother now claims that this water contained some form of voodoo, implying that it was a deliberate act intended to thwart my cousin's marriage prospects so I could marry first. It is essential to note that my mother and I do not subscribe to such beliefs. My mother is educated, having attended university to study chemistry. I have never witnessed her engage with or entertain such notions in our everyday lives. So yes, this is my story about my remarkable and wonderful family. My oldest aunt undoubtedly aligns with my grandmother's perspective. The sun would rise in the west before she disagrees with her revered mother. Strangely enough, my youngest aunt also appears to not dissent from my grandmother's assertions. Throughout these experiences, I have learned to anticipate my family's patterns, yet this particular situation has left me bewildered. I cannot quite pinpoint the reason behind their behavior. Is it truly distressing for them that I married before my cousin? Or do they wish for my mother to remain inadequate in securing a spouse for me? I would appreciate any thoughts or insights regarding this situation. It is possible that I am overly focused or biased in my interpretation. If anyone can propose a plausible explanation, it would be greatly valued. Or perhaps this situation is simply incomprehensible. Story 2. A heated argument with my ex disrupted our D&D session, leaving me naked and weaponless in-game while I exploded with frustration. This is my first time posting here, so I apologize for any formatting issues. I suppose I should introduce everyone right after the summary, so here it goes. These are all fictitious names, of course. Summary: my former partner and I had a confrontation at the Dungeons and Dragons table, which completely disrupted the mood and ruined the atmosphere for the entire group, including the Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master, a close friend of mine. We have been friends for quite some time, and he is a good Dungeon Master, even though he sometimes creates encounters that feel a bit unbalanced. He has had ongoing issues with Rose, as he doesn't view our past relationship as healthy. However, he has always made an effort not to be disrespectful towards them out of respect for me. Rose, my ex-partner. We ended our relationship after being together for a year, which, while not a long time, was my first serious relationship after a string of failures. It was enjoyable for a while, but quickly became exhausting. We broke up around 3 months prior to this incident and have had minimal contact since, especially since I have been blocked, which is complicated since we share not only a campaign, but also the same friend group. Rose's character is an entertainer, mostly serving as support and using charm on others, often their teammates rather than opponents. Lilac, another close friend. They are the Dungeon Master's partner, having been together for a shorter time than Rose and I were. Their character resembles an assassin, and a significant aspect of their backstory revolves around a lack of free will. They hope to develop independence through the story and by making friends throughout the campaign. Chartreuse, a friend I have known for a shorter time compared to Lilac or the Dungeon Master. He tends to be unpredictable at times. While he doesn't play a central role, he has a knack for creating chaos. Surprisingly, he was not the issue during this incident. He plays a character similar to a wizard, Cobalt, the final person in our group and another close friend. He does not contribute much during sessions, but plays a pivotal role in the finale. He plays a chef whose main responsibility is to prepare meals, functioning similarly to an alchemist by creating brews to aid the team, even though he rarely does so. Me, I play a warrior, which is a blend of barbarian and fighter. Unlike most of the others, I don't have magical abilities and heavily depend on my great sword to be of any use. As you can likely gather, We were engaged in a homebrew campaign. The dungeon master was thrilled to try it out, crafting a storyline inspired by One Piece, his favorite show. Everything was progressing well after the first few sessions, and the group became very invested in their characters. I developed a reputation for having bad luck after rolling poorly during a session where I fought a small horde of boars, resulting in me losing an eye, and more notably, making an enemy when the leader of the boars consumed the Hito Hito no Mai, transforming into a half-human, half-boar hybrid and subsequently joining the Marines. Fast forward a bit to our actual meeting Lilac, and I became friends. I resonated with the idea of freedom since I grew up in the woods within a loose family structure, while they had a background as a child soldier. We connected, eventually meeting the other friends except for Rose, who was unable to attend the first session. Everything was going splendidly. With everyone introducing themselves and settling into their respective roles, we easily fell into our positions within the group. However, a significant issue persisted regarding teamwork in this group-oriented game. Our overall effectiveness seemed consistently capped at 50%, regardless of the scenario, whether it was roleplay, combat, or strategy. In roleplay, Cobalt often contributed very little, as did Lilac. It was left to me and Chartreuse to engage the others and encourage more interaction. In battles, Lilac and I primarily handled the combat, with Chartreuse assisting occasionally, though often unintentionally causing us harm. In nearly every fight, I ended up incapacitated, which I didn't mind as I was willing to take on the role of the team's tank. I wish I could say that this changed when Rose joined us, but unfortunately, despite my hopes, this was not the case. In the second session, I arrived late and noticed Lilac's character, who seldom shows any emotions, hiding in the crow's nest of our boat. Naturally, I went to check on them, only to spot the boar leader from earlier. I had previously expressed that my character would want to engage him instantly if he spotted him. However, in character, I saw my friend afraid in the corner, likely due to the new arrival, while out of character, I could tell that Lilac was unable to act, presumably because of something Rose had done. Caught between these choices, both in and out of character, I chose to prioritize my friend. I checked in on Lilac, who insisted their character was fine, but out of character, they appeared scared and curled up. I attempted to bolster their confidence again, but my efforts were in vain, leading me to redirect my attention to the adversary. We had some good role-play as the fight began, but Rose made a cutting comment about me, charging into battle without thought, or something similar, which prompted me to clarify that the dynamic between my character and this enemy had been previously established. Witnessing a friend engaged in a battle, the rest of us excluding Cobalt, who was unaware of the fight, and Rose joined the initiative. The others rolled poorly, with Lilac rolling a natural one and inadvertently trapping themselves in a tree created with their devil fruit, while Chartreuse accidentally zapped Lilac with a misfired spell, knocking them into the water. Chaos ensued as Lilac began to drown. Fortunately, Rose did not merely stand idly by and attempted to help Lilac out of the water using their devil fruit summon ability, which also backfired. During this, my one-on-one with the boar leader became an endurance test, one that I ultimately lost. Although Lilac was rescued, I was taken prisoner by the boar man and imprisoned in the dungeon. The others made attempts to assist, mainly Chartreuse, but they were intercepted and attacked by guards. Seeing their one friend in danger, Lilac insisted that the group attempt to rescue me, which the others reluctantly agreed to, though Rose added a comment about how it was foolish of me to engage in battle. They ventured to the castle where I was being held, and while Rose opted for diplomacy, Lilac wanted to force their way in. Rose, appearing as a ghost due to one of their abilities, convinced one guard that he would go to hell if he didn't assist us. However, the other guard at the drawbridge was not easily fooled. He called for backup, prompting a massive fight that the party did not manage to survive. After a grueling and tedious battle, we decided to attempt a retreat. Lilac, still unwilling to abandon their friend, was compelled to leave after being charmed by Rose, and eventually the entire party was caught regardless. This particular confrontation consumed the entire session after I was defeated, and I was unable to partake in any actions while incapacitated. While I did not mind being out of the game during such an enjoyable fight to listen to, I did, however, feel a bit frustrated. Subsequently, upon entering the dungeon, the party was stripped of their belongings. While this was a fair consequence for what occurred, I was not merely left without items. I was entirely stripped of everything, including clothing, leaving my character completely naked in-game next to a random NPC. During the following session, we managed to escape our cells, but I still had no weapons aside from two flame dials that Chartreuse provided, which functioned like burning hands spell scrolls. I fashioned a makeshift spear from a damaged cell bar. Most of the others still had abilities they could use without their equipment, with Cobalt being the only other exception. Upon escaping my cell, the random NPC left first due to being an escape artist, subsequently alerting the guards just as we were attempting to formulate a plan. I tried to stop the escape artist to prevent them from alerting the guards, but it was too late. The guards opened the doors, and my spear seemingly shattered upon striking their shields. No big deal, right? I still had the fire spells, so I used them, trying my best to assist in the fight while the others utilized their abilities, with the exceptions being Lilac and Rose. Lilac had a valid reason for their absence as they couldn't log in due to a power outage. Rose, however, did not. As we pressed forward, I was again shot in the knee, now forced to carry Rose while they used their ghostly protection ability to scout. Consequently, my hands were occupied, causing me to suffer from disadvantage on dexterity saves and checks. Moving on, Rose spotted a route upstairs defended by a creature, a three-headed Cerberus that Chartreuse wished to tame using his homebrew Pokémon trainer-esque subclass. We brought one of the guards' bodies as bait, but this plan backfired significantly. The creature entered a frenzy, targeting Chartreuse and reducing him to 1 hit point. To both protect Chartreuse and secure the beast for himself, Rose activated one of their abilities and attempted to tame it via animal handling, which worked to some extent. The creature ceased its assault, but at that moment, the guards arrived, bringing a cannon along with them and their vice-captain. We were ordered to surrender, which marked a major turning point. Chartreuse, frustrated by the outcome of taming the creature, was at his wit's end and simply wished to inflict as much damage as possible. Cobalt, hesitant to encounter further trouble, agreed to yield. Rose also suggested it would be wiser to surrender, arguing that doing so would grant us an audience with the king. I, however, did not want to surrender. I regarded the king as a weak leader who allowed his kingdom to be easily overrun by the Marines, believing that whatever he decided would carry the Marines' influence, especially since I had not been able to take any action for nearly 2 sessions. I was fed up and yearned for an opportunity to participate rather than remain unconscious, merely carrying my teammates while being unarmed and unclothed. Thus, I devised a plan to fight, conveying to the others that I did not wish to surrender. I was greeted with another sarcastic remark from Rose. The enemy's cannonballs were explosive, so my strategy was to get close enough to detonate the cannon and its ammunition, hopefully incapacitating the foes long enough for the party to escape and search for our items. Rose adamantly insisted on surrendering, repeatedly dismissing my plan, leading me to do the same, making my approach increasingly reckless with each bit of information I received and each comment that was directed at me. My plan ultimately failed, and Rose remarked that they had known this would occur, attributing a majority of the blame to me, without singling anyone out specifically, and suggested they should have charmed me instead. In response, I expressed some resentment, pointing out that their negotiation attempts had not succeeded in saving me. Rose countered, stating that my track record in fights had not been favorable either. By this point, the actual campaign had come to a halt due to our argument, which erupted. The dungeon master had to intervene to help defuse the situation. Eventually, they managed to calm us down a bit and expressed that they felt I refused to acknowledge their ideas and was unmoving in my stance. Typically, I can calm down swiftly, but at that moment, I was still quite agitated. How could they accuse me of this when they did not even allow me to speak at times? How could they say this when they earned a reputation in our group for being notoriously obstinate and challenging to engage with? I eventually settled down after some time, realizing where I was. I had become the problematic player, bringing myself, my friends, and the entire campaign down because of a personal disagreement with my ex. I attempted to sincerely apologize, but I did not receive full acknowledgement or forgiveness. I recognized I did not deserve their forgiveness if they were unwilling to provide it, but it demonstrated the disarray of the session at that point. This incident is still very recent, as it just occurred a few hours ago. Rose and I plan to have a private conversation tomorrow so we can both compose ourselves before figuring out how to move forward as friends or at least acquaintances to prevent a recurrence of such an incident. I might offer updates in the future. Story 3. After 6 years together, I'm losing love for my fiancé. He's jobless, unsupportive, and upset about my hobbies. Can we salvage this? Hello, Reddit. I find myself at a crossroads. Others seem to believe it's best to cut my losses, but I thought I would seek some advice here as well. I, 23-year-old female, autistic, have been in a relationship with my partner, 23-year-old male, for almost 6 years, and we have been engaged for 5. We met just before the COVID-19 pandemic in 2019 through a video game. The game was somewhat niche, yet popular within its fandom. Recently, however, our relationship has felt off, different. I no longer feel that same love. I recognize that the honeymoon phase can wear off, but I thought we had moved past that. Background: this issue began around 2021-2022, when we were in a small Minecraft Discord community. If my partner sees this, it might be easier to discuss since I'm not one for confrontations. I have permanent friends due to dissociative identity disorder, which my partner has known about since the early months of our relationship. And one of them, who is no longer present, had started to inappropriately roleplay with the server's administrator. The administrator, whom I will refer to as Jerk, decided to reciprocate and even went so far as to send him inappropriate pictures. I felt compelled to do damage control and understand why I hadn't noticed any of this sooner. My partner, understandably, became distrustful and anxious around me, but he eventually seemed to recover. Or so I thought. A year later, while he was at my house and using my phone, as I had requested him to do something for me, he started going through it and intended to text one of our former friends. It turned out that another one of my permanent friends, who had gone undetected, had launched an ASMR channel and was discussing it with our ex-friend. My partner, once again rightfully, became upset. However, we managed to resolve it, and the permanent friend agreed to delete the channel and distance themselves from it. Here are some other relevant points about my partner. 1. He does not have a job and is unwilling to file for unemployment after his seasonal job terminated his position without notice. 2. He continues to live with his mother, father, and 3 siblings, one of whom receives state assistance due to autism. 3. He does not drive and refuses to obtain a driver's license. 4. He spends his days playing video games or sleeping. 5. His only hobbies appear to be writing stories and role-playing for himself. 6. He is struggling in college and complains that he never wanted to attend, yet his parents provided him with the same ultimatum mine did. 7. When he does have money, he spends it on food, saves it so I can take a break from work and visit him, or buys video games that I am unable to play on my outdated laptop, leading him to become upset when I cannot play the games he acquires for me on my inadequate device. If I recall more, I will share it in an update or before I submit this. And for those wondering how he got to my house in the previous paragraph without a license, he flew in to see me, with me driving to collect him, and I covered his ticket until he reimbursed me in person. Recently, I relocated to a new home after a challenging 2 months dealing with an awful landlord. Consequently, I have been exceedingly busy with unpacking, arranging, and managing my work obligations. My only other source of joy, aside from hearing him talk about wanting to play video games or role-play with me, is engaging with all things related to Gravity Falls. Every autistic person has their own fixation. Gomez Adams had trains, my partner's brother is obsessed with Sonic, and I am passionate about Gravity Falls. I adore it immensely, especially after gaining independence and the financial means to purchase what I desire. I've been buying everything I missed out on. The books, the fan-made merchandise, the complete DVD set, everything I can get my hands on. I even won sketch concepts from Alex Hirsch himself at his auction to assist with the California fires in LA. When I called to share this news, his reaction was underwhelming. because he had other urgent concerns at that moment. He later apologized for his response, but it still stung a bit to hear him sound so irritated by my good news. I recently joined a Discord server centered around an alternate universe of Gravity Falls, and what was his response? I thought we agreed not to join another large server. This is the same individual who also joined a server for Rust. He may not be active there, but still. He joined a large server as well. When I pointed this out, he responded, "But I'm not active there, I only use it to converse with one other person." He became upset when I tried to incorporate references to the alternate universe in our roleplay, insisting, "Keep the alternate universe out of our stories. I do not wish to hear them. That server will eventually fail like all the others." I deleted the reference. I cannot discuss Gravity Falls without him getting upset and commenting negatively or expressing disinterest in hearing anything else related to the characters. Yet, he rarely expresses complaints about his brother who lives with him. If he does, they are brief and dismissive. He becomes irritated when my Discord notifications sound, and even when I silence them, he remains picky and wants to know what I'm doing. I casually mentioned his disdain for my discussions about Gravity Falls and the server to some people in the community. Two messaged me privately, asking if I was okay, noting that this isn't typical partner behavior. And I received a warning from the moderators stating that venting is not allowed. Thus, I am writing this now. I am hesitant to mention my need for privacy, as he only interprets things logically and requires concrete evidence. If I share something minor like it's just the server, he will inquire about what they're saying, and then become upset when I share those details. He always wants to hang out after I finish work. I often lose sleep due to hanging out with him. My job requires me to do the main closing shifts, which sometimes means I do not get off until 2 a.m., depending on the manager. And he becomes upset when I return home late, or visibly frustrated if I tell him I'm too exhausted to hang out. However, when he expresses fatigue or wants to engage in another activity, I respond with the same reassurance, "You don't have to ask me, dear." I let it end there. I do not press him to stay awake or act upset when he needs rest. I allow him to sleep or pursue his interests. We watched Creature Commandos recently, and a scene involving Dr. Phosphorus's backstory arose, gore discussion ahead. The character was forced to make contact with his deceased wife and son, contaminating the crime scene, then was thrust into his own machine, transforming him into the glowing skeleton he appears as in the series. This character then goes on to exact revenge on the person who killed his wife and son and turned him into a monster, and the entire family, including the wife and daughter. My partner asked if I would do the same if he were murdered, and I affirmed that I would. I was on my menstrual cycle and not in the best mood, and honestly, yes, I would feel compelled to seek vengeance on the person and their family for such an atrocity. He expressed that he was scared and conveyed his disappointment in me for making such statements. He stated I was scaring him. This is the same person who desires to engage in bloodletting so we can write and sign a blood contract when we eventually wed. Really? Additionally, he recently gifted me 2 games. Surprising, right? He wanted to play them, but neither functions on my laptop, and he became annoyed when I expressed my frustration about their incompatibility. He then launched into a rant about how well you can play Stardew Valley with strangers. I had played Stardew once, with some individuals from the alternate universe server, and it was only because I knew it runs on my laptop. I maintain 2 additional jobs in addition to my current one. Both are summer positions and yield substantial income. I missed one of them to attend a Scottish festival in his area. I mentioned my desire to go for bonding time with my future mother-in-law, whom I genuinely adore. While at the festival, he became agitated, irritated, and was overall sullen throughout the day. He was short and snippety with me, as well as his mother. Using my earnings from my primary job, I bought him a sword since he enjoys pirate-related items. Even that did not improve his mood. He continued to complain about the day and about feeling tired. So we returned to the hotel. He did thank me for the sword. I crafted handmade gifts for him, things he loved. He has a fascination with the multiverse, so I created a postcard from one of his characters. It included a group drawing, several written letters, and more. I even designed a custom stamp to go on the postage. I have spent my money on custom items, like wax stamp heads and coins, as well as covering the travel expenses. He only recently began to repay me for the costs of gas and hotels. As for gift giving for me, it's invariably stories or games that either hold little interest for me or are unplayable on my device. There have only been 3 gifts he has given me that I genuinely cherished a redraw of a meme and lore-based gifts involving Half-Life and his characters. I know this may sound selfish, but I genuinely strive to create presents he will like and appreciate. I consistently ask him what he would like in a gift or what he needs. He has only asked me once, which turned out to be for a small story that I enjoyed. The only significant issue I observe: whenever I attempt to request some time alone, or when I consider asking for a brief break to disconnect from my phone or computer, he engages in lengthy discussions about how he loves me and how if he had never met me, he would not exist in this world. Yes, I guess my concluding question is our 6-year relationship irreparably damaged? Or is there a possibility of salvaging it? Therapy is not an option, as he does not believe it would help with his other issues. I also hope this inquiry does not come across as a rant vent. I aimed only to provide some context and details from both perspectives. Summary: my out-of-work partner is behaving in ways that differ significantly from the person I first became attached to, and he is increasingly pushy and unkind regarding my activities, my life, and my friendships beyond him.